statements. He didn't say, he apologized, but didn't reveal too much. If he's going to go forward with the argument that this was a bad domestic spat and not an example of sex trafficking, not an example of a freak off, he could use that video and say, I'm apologizing for what happened between me and her, but it doesn't mean I did anything illegal regarding a racketeering enterprise. Okay,
absolutely.
Couple things. So this again is a live feed outside the courthouse. There are no cameras allowed in the courtroom. We're doing our best to provide you updates as they come in. We have these live updates coming in, but we are also taking your questions on YouTube. So if you have a question about the Sean Combs case, if you have a question about what's happening in today's hearing, submit it on YouTube. We'll read it on the air. I do have a little update for you, Ava. So the judge said any application under the Speedy Trial Act, the government responded, we move to exclude time under the act. It's already told by the motion. The judge said I exclude time until December 18th. I have no application for bail before me. What does that mean?
Well, under the Speedy Trial Act, he has a right to go to trial within 90 days. What can happen is there's certain situations where you would exclude, so certain time wouldn't count against the government. As here, it could be a few weeks, it could be a month, and that way it still gives them more time.
Now, the judge concluded this hearing. So that's right. The hearing is concluded. We're going to have Elizabeth Milner coming out right now, and we're going to do some follow-up questions with her. But basically, the judge said, so Mr. Combs will remain detained. Let me ask you this, Brian, as we wait for Elizabeth to come out of the courthouse, and she'll give us kind of an overview of what was happening inside there, and we might actually see some pressers from maybe Mark Agnifilo. Well, we'll see if we hear any more statements about the case. Talking about the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, his appeal to fight bail, his appeal to try to get bail once again, when will we get a decision in that case? I mean, they just filed their brief in support of their brief saying he should be granted pretrial release. When will the court make a decision?
I think it's going to be real quick. You know, for a high-profile appeal like this, I think they'll move quickly. You'll probably see something within the next 2 weeks.
And Ava, the thing about it is, someone like him, and I remember his attorney said this, you know, obviously there's terrible conditions within that detention center, the Metropolitan Detention Center, but also said that he might be a target because of his high-profile status. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. We saw that with the R. Kelly case. One of the things his attorney said when they were trying to get him to get bail was, look, he was a target and he did get beaten up, and the guy who beat him up wanted publicity for his own case. Definitely. P. Diddy, he could very likely be a target in prison.
Brian, something you mentioned, it just struck me as we're talking about, because one of the big things that's came out of this hearing is, could we potentially see a trial in the spring of 2025, much sooner than I think a lot of us had anticipated? If the defense starts getting all this material, and I believe they already received on October 7th their first batch of material, if they start to see something and they say, wow, the evidence is a lot worse than we thought, do you think they're going to say, you know what, we need a little bit more time?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, they can ask for more time anytime they want. I think what this judge is going to basically tell them is, once you've gotten discovery, don't wait around. You've now made the aggressive decision to ask for a trial in May. You didn't have to do that. You could have had a designated complex, and we could have set it for 2025, the December of 2025, anytime you want it. So since they asked for it, if they're going to make such a move, they better do it quick.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the questions that was asked of me from Bush Baby on YouTube, is his dream team in attendance today? Look, he's assembled a whole new legal team, an appellate attorney. I'm not sure exactly who was accompanying him today. We know that Mark Agnifilo was. We'll find out from Elizabeth Milner maybe a little bit more about his team, who was with him in court, but we'll see, and also who else was in attendance. We have a question from Marissa McGill. Will he be charged in any other state, Ava, or do you think his time will be consecutive in one?
I think we really won't know until we see how things unfold.
Well, it was in New York because a lot of the conduct could have been centered here. But if you take the allegations as true, and there was conduct in California too, do you think there was a conversation between New York prosecutors and California prosecutors about this? Or do you think maybe this was just always New York based and this is where it's going to be?
There may have been a conversation and New York may have decided we're going to go forward with it.
Yeah. All right. Question for you, Brian. This is from Famous Joker of YouTube. Do you think it's Combs, or is there one person in the background, someone with more power? So I actually like this question. I'll tell you why. I am convinced, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I am convinced. Everybody says, oh, Sean Combs is going to spill the beans. He's going to turn on people more powerful than him, the people controlling the strings, in order to get a better deal. I don't think that's possible, because he would have to agree to significant prison time as part of a deal. And I don't think he's going to want to do that whatsoever. You could disagree with me about that. But I guess also the question is, who would he provide information on? Who is bigger than him?
Yeah, I get the question from Famous Joker, but I really think that you're looking at the guy. That's the tip of the iceberg. I think there is an iceberg, but I'm not so sure that there's anybody above him that the feds are too interested in. This was his party, and they want him to pay for it.
And I would say you don't even need him, right, Ava? You don't even need, if so much of this is documented on videos and text messages and witness accounts, do you even need the testimony of Sean Combs? Now, of course, I would imagine taking a deal is optimal. You can save the pain of having these witnesses testify and talk about what happened to them, the expense, the time of a trial. But I also think you don't even need him as a cooperating witness, right? They want to prosecute him.
Right. And I think in his trial, he's probably not going to want to say a word.
Yeah. So again, let me also tell you, by the way, that brings me to another point. So Elizabeth Milner is coming out. We're going to have her on as soon as she can. We'll talk more about what she observed in the courtroom. What are the main takeaways from today, where we see this trial going, where we see this case going. Ava raised an interesting question, Brian. Do you think that Sean Combs, and his attorney said he wants to do it, you think Sean Combs would take the stand in his own defense?
Well, I got to tell you, I mean, that's usually not the rule. It's usually not the game plan. But when you're dealing with a case like this, where there has to be some questions answered, sometimes the best person, to answer them is the defendant himself. He's eloquent. He's smart. He gets it. This might be one of those cases where you do that, particularly if some of the evidence has to be explained. We talked about the video. I mean, you got to explain that video. Otherwise, you're just a vicious, bad guy. There may be text messages he has to explain. There may be video evidence that we haven't seen that has to be explained. Who's going to explain it? They said that it's going to take a week to try it. Well, there's 8 hours in a court day. That's a lot of witnesses for 1 week. I want to know who these witnesses are, and if Sean Combs isn't among them, it would be the norm. But it might not be what this case takes from the defense perspective.
That's a good point. So if you take their argument is true that this would take 1 week to defend, what kind of witnesses would they call? Who would they call? Would they call, I mean, other than cross-examining the state's alleged victims and trying to point to the fact that this was consensual behavior, they call male sex workers? I think so. I think they would call male sex workers to say that all of this was on the up and up and consensual, other than the fact that you're hiring male prostitutes to participate in these activities. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be where the rubber hits the road in this case. I mean, you're going to have to establish that all these people were paid for and came in willing and knowing.
Sometimes, the only thing more difficult than running a business is finding the right words to market it. Lucky for you, our new AI content generator doesn't sweat words. Just tell it what you want to create, enter a few details, click Generate Content, and in just seconds it'll give you options to build from or leave as is. Writer's block? Not anymore. With artificial intelligence doing the wordsmithing for you, you can craft the perfect message in the blink of an AI.
They never brought up the bail application. Why not? Bail pending criminal prosecution is mandatory. It's mandatory. You can't deprive a person of bail. Because you have a right to be convicted before you can subject to the penalty of a crime. You can't have the punishment before the conviction. Due process mandates bail or release pending conviction. Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Identify yourself.
Listen, my name is Ari and I'm a paralegal. The United States Constitution mandates that nobody should be subjected to the penalties of a crime without a conviction. Therefore, it's mandatory that Mr. Coons be released pending a conviction.
Fried chicken and wontons and teriyaki glaze and an egg roll. Some people think the Zaxby Sensation salad is too delicious to be a salad. Yep, that's why we call it a salad. The Zaxby Sensation salad. Zaxby's.
There's a flight risk and everything like that. There's no evidence that he ever sought to evade prosecution. It's called pre-evention. You can't do that. You can't say punish a person for something they might do. They can only punish a person for something they have done. So the law mandates that he be released pending his trial, and that any deprivation constitutes a fundamental deprivation or violation of.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber. So you're looking at a live view right now outside of the New York Federal Courthouse where Sean Combs just had a status hearing where his attorneys and the prosecutors and the judge, they went over a number of issues regarding gag orders, regarding the government allegedly leaking material. Most importantly, I would say, is the discovery schedule, how much material there is in this case, when it's going to be turned over to the defense. And I will tell you, the idea that his defense team is looking for a May 2025 trial date, very ambitious, given how much material there is. So I want to bring in right now, I have two special guests as we wait, by the way, for Elizabeth Milner, our reporter who is inside that courthouse, to come out and give us the latest. I'm here with Law and Crime's legal counsel, our general counsel, Elizabeth Vulai, here with me on set, and acclaimed litigator Ben Shu, who knows a thing or two about representing high-profile individuals. He represented Johnny Depp in his infamous trial that we covered here on Law and Crime. Great to have you both here. Elizabeth, I'll start with you. First of all, there might be a presser. I have no idea who the guy was that just went on. We're trying to confirm that. But we're also, by the way, taking all of your questions on YouTube. So if you have any questions, make sure to throw them out here and we'll answer them on YouTube. And there's a bunch that came in. First thing I want to ask you, though, what do you think about the idea of a May 2025 trial date, given how much material there is?
I think it's a really ambitious trial date. I think my understanding is that if his attorneys are not sure if he'll be released on bail, one of his main attorneys had said, we don't want him detained here any longer than he has to be. So I think that played a big role in it. But it is surprising because this is a case with a lot of witnesses, a lot of evidence. So I think it's an ambitious goal.
Yeah. Ben, I want to go to you. We have some questions from our YouTubers. And the question was, and it wasn't discussed today, but the issue of bail. This issue is not going to be decided by this judge. It's now being appealed to a higher court, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. In fact, Sean Combs' defense team filed their papers on October 8th, so 2 days ago. They listed a number of reasons why they think he should be entitled to bail, that he shouldn't be detained pre-trial. The question that I have is from Sharon Denies on YouTube. When do we hear when and if he gets bail?
Jesse, first, it's great to be with you again. I think the Second Circuit will act very quickly on this. This is obviously a high-profile case. Second Circuit acts with alacrity generally, so I would think that it would come down with the ruling fairly quickly.
I agree. When you're dealing with this kind of issue. And it's so funny, Ben, because we were talking earlier, me and Brian McMonigal and Ava Sullivan, that right now he wants bail. Right now he wants to get out of federal lockup as quickly as possible. But, right, and that's why he's pushing for a trial date around the corner. But if the Second Circuit agrees with him and says, yeah, you know what, you're right, you're released on bail, I think he's going to want to push this trial as far down the line as possible. He doesn't want to be convicted tomorrow, which the evidence seems strong, but obviously he's going to put on a defense. But he probably would want to push this out.
I completely agree, because with time, the more time he's out, obviously he can enjoy that time, or at least enjoy it more than he would in jail. And the more time he has to find corroborating witnesses, these sex workers who presumably will testify that everything was on the up and up, to the extent that can be on the up and up, that this was voluntary. Time would be his friend once he's out on bail. That gives him a longer time to, memories also fade, which is good for him since it's going to be the prosecution that has the burden.
That's a good point. By the way, this is a live shot from outside the courthouse. We just saw who appeared to be Combs' family and associates leaving the courthouse. We were waiting to see if anybody will hold a press conference and provide some more details here as we wait for this to happen. By the way, I should let everybody know, this is Elizabeth's first time doing a live show, and she's killing it already. I'm so happy to have you on here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I want to throw some more questions to you. So we have a question from Chrissy T on YouTube. Does New York have the death penalty?
It does not. So there's still a fair amount of states actually that have the death penalty, around 25, I believe, but New York does not.
I think they abolished it in 2004, if I remember correctly.
I think so.
But even if it was, sex trafficking and racketeering wouldn't be grounds to execute someone, even if he's convicted, right?
Correct. Even if he's convicted, there's no basis, at least within New York, to proceed with that. But as far as what could happen in other states, we don't know. You know, this is somebody who had homes all across the U.S. We're not sure if investigations will start there, depending on where the conduct took place. But in New York, it would just be prison time if he's convicted.
So I have a question for you, Ben. There's been a very interesting legal update. Tony Busby, this Texas attorney, has announced that he is representing over 100 alleged victims of Sean Combs, that he plans to file over 120 lawsuits across the country. He has said that at least 25 of these alleged victims say that they were abused by Sean Combs when they were minors. I'll give you an opportunity to respond to how that's even going to look, how that would operate. But I'm also going to throw a second question to you. This is from NJ on YouTube. Are the victims, this is from Janal Taylor on YouTube. Is there a possibility that he's going to be charged for the minors allegedly involved? So two questions. How do you even bring 120 lawsuits? And B, considering we're talking about that, is Sean Combs going to ultimately be charged with respect to minors?
Yeah, I might have to be reminded of the third question, but with respect to the 100 or 100 plus lawsuits, there's going to be a threshold issue. If I were representing Diddy, I would move to stay those cases pending the criminal trial. That happens a lot in certain states, such as California. If you have simultaneous civil and criminal cases arising out of the same conduct, it can be.
Ben, stand by. I want to get your answer on this, but I think we are hearing right now from Anthony Rico, who is one of Sean Combs' attorneys, but I could be wrong. Let's go back. This is live.
This is a serious proceeding with serious consequences, and all of us are addressing it accordingly.
Anthony, is it a racist proceeding, as Marcus said?
Nobody's okay with staying in jail for now. Okay, thank you very much. That's it for today.
Continue to believe that.
Okay, so we really couldn't get much from that. But I mean, Ben, it seemed that last point was nobody's happy being in jail, which again seemed to be the motivation for maybe why they want a quick trial date. I want to go back to what you were saying, though. We were talking about how this Texas attorney would bring over 120 lawsuits and whether or not Sean Combs could ultimately be charged with respect to abusing minors.
Yeah, certainly. And that adds another extraordinarily disturbing aspect to this. I mean, before today, a lot of legal commentators were saying that this is what distinguishes his case with R. Kelly, that as awful as these allegations against Diddy are, and they are, until today, I don't believe there was any suggestion that any of the alleged victims were minors. Now, if these allegations, bear fruit, then yeah, they absolutely can be the subject of criminal allegations. In fact, I believe that's how it worked in this case, that prior to the indictment of Diddy, there were the civil cases. And of course, the release of the Cassie Ventura video. So civil cases can precede criminal cases. And that is another disturbing front for Diddy and his attorneys. But I would expect that they would move to stay those cases pending the resolution of this criminal case in New York.
Just follow up with that on one thing. First of all, there were allegations in the civil lawsuits regarding minors. I mean, some of the people who have sued him said that they were sexually abused when they were underage. But the idea of 25 minors, a 9-year-old being abused. Haven't heard anything like that until Tony Busby brought it up. But, even Lil Rod Jones, who filed the lawsuit against Sean Combs, insinuated that he was tasked with soliciting minors for these parties, or that was part of this case. One thing I want to just follow up on with you, is there a chance, you said that the petition to pause the civil case is pending the criminal trial. If Sean Combs is acquitted, what happens to the civil trial, the civil cases? Do people say, they could still file the lawsuit, but if he's acquitted by a jury, and yes, you're dealing with different standards of law, does it make them less likely to continue their lawsuits against him?
I think the cases, I can't see Busby just folding the tent and going home. It would depend in part about what happened in the criminal trial. If there were some kind of vindication, then yes, I think that would be very difficult for the criminal. But, we saw in the Michael Jackson case, of course, where there was an acquittal followed by civil liability, and O.J. Simpson. I think there's ample precedent for winning the criminal case and yet being held for civil liability. So I wouldn't think that he would be so faint of heart as to give up. And I don't think his clients would want to either.
Yeah, that's a good point. Elizabeth, we have a question from NJ on YouTube. Are the victims being protected from Diddy's people? And clearly it's a fair question in the sense that, assuming they are really victims, they're not of Sean Combs, we know that his danger to the public, his danger to the victims, the witnesses, was a key factor in him being denied bail. So do you think there's some mechanism being put forward where they are being protected?
Hopefully, yes. Just by the sheer nature of him being detained, if all of these allegations turn out to be true, they get protection in that sense, and that he's not free to potentially cause harm to other people. But I think one of the things to also keep in mind is a report that I saw this week about how there's still fear among the community of people speaking out about this, because even though he's detained in prison,
if a person is arrested and the investigation is still ongoing, but a defendant has the right to a speedy trial, is that right in any way hindered by a lengthy, ongoing investigation like this? And I guess the way to think about it is, and we were talking about it before, he wants to go to trial in May without even seeing all of the evidence. We don't know if he's going to be hit with additional charges. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, that's why I think it's such a bit of a risk for his attorneys to ask for that. Again, one of the reasons is they don't want him detained as short as possible. They want him detained, obviously. Whether they could possibly get some sort of extension, depending on if there's more evidence than they thought, it might be a little bit difficult as they get closer to that spring trial date, because then you'll have the judge saying, hey, we met last year, you both conferred, you both agreed to this trial date, and also given the public pressure to make sure that this case doesn't drag on. Again, prosecutors do want to make an example out of this, so I don't think it's something that they want to keep pushing for years to come.
Right. Ben, question for you. This is from Chelly on YouTube. Will the government use ex-partners, presumably of Sean Combs, to provide a timeline of his actions to jurors? I just did a sidebar the other day where I broke down every single lawsuit that he's facing in order, and it made me wonder, how is the prosecution going to structure their case if they have multiple people and maybe multiple ex-partners who want to testify? Do they structure it like that? They want to create a timeline?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question, and I'm somewhat simple-minded. I like to put things in chronological order because it's a very logical way to set forth a case. Sometimes as you know, you can put together a case thematically, which you want to do, but timelines are extremely helpful. So I think the question is great, and if I were the prosecution, I'd want to have a very clear timeline. And explain that clearly to the jury, because I do think a lot of jurors will also want things in a chronological order.
Yeah, it's easy to tell. Then, of course, you have to deal with witness availability, when they can testify, when evidence is available. Sometimes it gets complicated. All right, I have a tough question. I don't know who to give it to. That's why I think I'll ask both of you. Ben, I'll start with you. This is I don't know the answer to this. This is from George Jansen. Has the defense or agents tested the baby oil for other narcotics. So the infamous that he had 1,000 bottles of baby oil, presumably to facilitate or to be used in these freak-off sessions, these coerced, prolonged sexual performances. You think that baby oil has been tested? And boy, oh boy, I didn't know that was going to be a statement I ever said. But you think that baby oil is going to be tested, Ben?
If it hasn't been tested before, I'm sure the prosecutors are watching your show and they'll be testing it now.
Well, that's their first mistake, but that's true. I don't know, Elizabeth. What do you think? If it's a closed, if it's an open bottle, maybe his DNA on it to see if it's his.
I think it's a possibility. You know, they referenced that in the indictment. They also did reference the possibility of people being under the influence of narcotics. So I think anything that they can get their hands on to obtain any sort of physical evidence, I wouldn't put it past them. Why not?
Because some people were shocked at how inebriated they were and how intoxicated they were. It's a fair question. It's a good question. All right. I have a civil law question for you. I have a litigation question for you, Ben. This is from Stephanie Pasnin. Why is Tony Busby accepting settlements? So the idea is, and this is based on the reporting, that he is, and I believe he told us to TMZ, that people have already come to him, high profile people, and are paying up to not be sued, to not be a part of this. What do you make of that?
That's very unusual, but creative on his part, and might give him and his clients a war chest to go forward against other defendants. But that's quite unusual at this point. I mean, I can certainly understand the incentive of these potential defendants to get out of the way of what will be a very unpleasant and expensive procedure, but that's creative on his part.
And I mean, I would imagine they do not want any part of them being named in anything with respect to Sean Combs. He's radioactive right now. They don't want to be a part of that. But let me ask you two questions about that. Does that mean that those claims are true? Or does it mean they just don't want the headache of litigation? And B, let me ask you this. Will we ever know who these people are that settled?
Well, those are great questions. It could be. I mean, a lot of lay people might assume, not the sophisticated viewers of this show, but there are people out there who would assume that any settlement means that the person who's paying money is guilty or is liable, and that's not the case. We all know that people settle cases for any number of reasons, you know, to avoid embarrassment, to avoid expense. So it doesn't connote guilt or innocence or liability. But I think it's difficult. I don't know if you're representing plaintiff X and you have resolved the case for plaintiff B. What if there's evidence in the case that you've settled and you've have some kind of protective order barring the use of that evidence? I don't know how you can do that without prejudicing your other potential clients, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. And that's a good way to look at that. I got to process that one for a second. Yeah, it's a good point. So again, let me just set the stage about what's happening. This hearing has concluded. There were a number of issues that were decided or at least discussed regarding discovery, a trial date. We are waiting for Elizabeth Milner to come out and give us a breakdown of everything that happened in court. As we do, we are taking your questions. I want to go back to you, Elizabeth. I have two questions for you. First question is, and this is something that we've been not only have we been asking for a long time, assuming these allegations are true, but also this was asked to Damian Williams, the United States attorney, right as Sean Combs was arrested. Why has this really only come to light now, especially as details appear to have happened decades ago?
Yeah, it's a good point. You know, whenever I hear a question like that, I always pinpoint back to November 2023 when Cassie Ventura filed her lawsuit. I would imagine that there's a lot of fear in a lot of people in coming forward with their claims with someone who did hold a lot of power, does have enormous resources. When she filed that lawsuit, I think it gave bravery for other people to come forward. And I think when prosecutors saw that, I think that was really helpful for them to be able to actually build their case. Because I would imagine before she filed her lawsuit, a lot of these things, maybe they were known in the industry or his friends, but the public didn't really have knowledge about it.
Right. No. Yeah. Yeah. And he didn't have a great answer for that, or maybe he didn't want to reveal it at that point. Ben, I'm going to give you the final question because I've looked at the time. I have to sign you both off. But Ben, I want to ask you this. This is from Kyle Lawrence Music. Will his federal case greatly impact his individual civil cases? And if convicted, will he have to serve his sentences concurrently?
Great question. That will be up to the judge as to whether the sentences are served concurrently. So that's going to be determined after trial. Yes, I think as a practical matter, a conviction in the criminal case will definitely have an impact on the civil cases because, as you pointed out earlier, the criminal standard of beyond a reasonable doubt is so much higher than the civil standard. But of course, if he's convicted of any of these crimes, civil liability is the least of his concerns because he's going to be deprived of his personal liberty probably for the rest of his life.
That seems to be his main focus right now. I lied. Elizabeth is going to stay with us. I wasn't kicking you off. I didn't see the time.
No hard feelings.
You're staying with us. Ben, though, unfortunately, Ben is a very busy man. We appreciate the time that he can give us. So Ben Chu, I have to sign you off, but thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate your insight as always.
Thank you so much, and nice to meet you, Elizabeth.
Nice to meet you too.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will hopefully get Elizabeth Milner on. We'll hear what happened in that courtroom, her observations of Sean Diddy Combs. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
What if better was easier than you ever thought possible? If you could try something different and actually feel good about doing it? What if all you had to do was change one little thing? Rise Mushroom Coffee's delicious blend of 6 functional mushrooms helps protect your gut, provide all-day energy, and boost immunity for a balanced body and mind. A better routine starts here.
Do you know what's really fun? Making a website on Wix. Hey, we're How Ridiculous, 3 childhood friends and digital content creators that do epic stuff from Perth, Australia.
We've got about 50 million followers. We're in the billions of views, and we're a small team. We always felt like our content was all about entertainment and being fun, but there was also this, sort of professional business side. One of the things that we knew was basically essential was getting our own website, so people would actually see a proper official group who mean business and who can deliver. And we now get unbelievable opportunities to do things like film balloon popping races with Manchester City. I don't know all the things that we're going to get to do in the next year or 5 years, but if we can do this as a job, anything's possible.
All right, welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. Our special coverage of the Sean Diddy Combs status hearing that happened today inside of New York Federal Court. I'm Jesse Weber, and right now we're going to go live to outside of that federal courthouse because our very own Elizabeth Milner is there. She was inside the courtroom for all the action today. Elizabeth, good to see you. So what were the main takeaways? What happened inside that courtroom? And if you can give us a little flavor of what did you observe from the man himself, Sean Combs?
Yeah, Jesse, it was pretty interesting because I think, we have seen many photos, videos of Sean Combs, aka Diddy, through the Associated Press, through Instagram. And so to see him kind of in person after being in jail for 3 weeks now was pretty interesting, to say the least. And I say that by being that you would expect him to feel a little defeated, a little gaunt, anything like that. But it wasn't that case. He appeared confident. He stood tall. But most importantly and most notably, when he walked inside the courtroom, the first thing that he looked at was his family. As soon as he saw his family, he just lit up. Another thing to note, too, is he wasn't shackled, but he was wearing a khaki prison-like jumpsuit when he appeared inside court. And his family appeared on their end very just happy to see him. Now, I will say when I was inside the courtroom, I was a little bit towards the back right side of the gallery. And so for seeing Sean Combs, I had to look through a few heads and stuff like that. But again, he appeared just kind of confident walking inside that courtroom, and might have just been the look that his family was there. So let me kind of paint a picture for you as well too. His mother arrived a little bit before 1 p.m. Eastern time today, and then whenever his children actually came into the courtroom or the courthouse actually kind of got silent. It was pretty interesting to see that as well too. So as far as who was sitting by who, you had Janice Combs, who sat by Justin, then it was followed by Chance, the twins, Jesse and Delilah, Quincy, and then Christian Combs, aka King. And so again, once they they all saw their father. They all smiled at him, waved at him. And even when we were all leaving the courthouse today, Diddy just blew kisses at his mother and his family members. They didn't say much of anything. I wasn't outside when they had first entered the courthouse, so I'm not sure if they said anything to the press. Previously, they had been very quiet whenever they had entered the courtroom. So I assume it'll be kind of like that as well, too. But it was interesting as well that a lot of the arguments kind of based around the data that was recovered and seized from the homes. So while a lot of us were kind of expecting there to be arguments about the bail or the bond, that really didn't happen. And the judge ordered that the defendant, Sean Combs, stay inside the MDNC, which we know the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York. And so as far as what we know now is that we know May 5th is going to be the date, tentatively, that the trial does begin. So we have a lot of stuff that we're expecting to see, but kind of going back to a little bit of the evidence there. Now, I'm looking through this notebook right here, mainly because we're not allowed to have electronic equipment when we're inside that courtroom. So all of this was handwritten notes. So just kind of going over just some of the things that were happening inside that courtroom, you know, I'm sure you have already talked about it there, as far as just all the data that prosecutors and now have in connection to the case. So 96 electronic devices were seized across 3 different locations. That included Diddy's Miami home, his LA mansion, as well as all the devices that were seized whenever he went to the airport. Because as we all remember, when the search warrants were happened, he was actually boarding a flight with his twin daughters, including, and I believe Chance was there as well too, his 18-year-old daughter now, when they were the search warrants were happening and Diddy was caught up at the airport. They did seize different devices that time as well too. And so the data mainly still has to be extracted. Now, the government was kind of talking about just some of the devices are a little bit older. So the government in turn is kind of catching up to the technology there. But they say at the airport, they seized 9 different devices. 7 of those have been extracted so far. At Miami, 36 different devices were seized. 29 were extracted. And in LA, 51 devices were seized. 24 have been extracted, excuse me. They say the 8 terabytes of data, that information could come about in the next 2 weeks or so. And they're working on the production, another production of the subpoena returns. And so the defense pretty much didn't object to too much inside the courtroom today. Agnifilo also appeared kind of confident during his arguments. I know a lot of people were kind of expecting for the bail or bond argument to be happening, but that didn't happen. And it appeared that the defense kind of, you know, I'm trying to find the right word here, but they were pretty much complying with all the prosecution's arguments and plan to kind of have everything all good and set to go by May. Now, by the time the end of the year is to happen, I forgot like one big turn right here. They did mention that a potential superseding indictment could come. Now, obviously that hasn't happened yet, but the investigation is still ongoing. And so, you know, we don't know a lot of information as far as what that could look like, but it appears that we could expect more charges to come later on, potentially by the end of the year.
That is what we've been echoing a lot, that we wouldn't be surprised if there's a superseding indictment. And I don't know. I don't think that May date is going to stick if he's hit with additional charges. That's just my guess. Elizabeth Milner, thank you so much. Great reporting, and happy you got a chance to be in that courtroom and also lay out the scene for us as well. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Good seeing you.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, so now we're going to break it down. I'm joined once again by our general counsel here at Law and Crime, Elizabeth Vulai, but also I am joined by criminal defense attorney Nima Rahmani. Good to see you. Thanks so much. Happy to have you both here. Nima, I'll start with you. I mean, the idea of a May 2025 trial date, and we talked about it before on the show, that Sean Combs, if he thinks he's going to be locked up, obviously wants to go to trial as soon as possible. I get it. He's kind of putting the prosecution's feet to the fire. But you heard Elizabeth, terabytes of data, all this to go through, a production schedule. This really going to happen in May, this trial?
Probably not, but Diddy's lawyers may want to jam up the government if they think there's any chance they're not ready in terms of presenting the electronic evidence or getting their witnesses lined up. It may be part and parcel of the defense's strategy to push this case to trial as quickly as possible. Obviously, we know Combs is in custody, so there's really no point for him to wait. We know that the defense case is going to be limited. When Judge Subramanian asked for a time estimate today, The prosecution gave 3 weeks. The defense only gave 1 week, which means that they're going to base this case mostly on cross-examination. So what they probably want to do is push this case as quickly as possible, because we know under the Speedy Trial Act, unless they waive time or time is excluded, the government technically has to get this to trial within 70 days.
So let me just follow up on that. If he's hit with a superseding indictment, right, and we don't know what those charges could be, we don't know if there could be multiple defendants, we don't know if they're respect to potentially minors. No, am I crazy to think that there's no way this trial is then going to happen in May?
It's unlikely, especially if there's a superseding indictment involving minors, because minors present a completely different set of circumstances. Because we know through his lawyers, Combs is arguing that the sexual activity happened, but it was consensual. Of course, for sex trafficking, you need one of those 3 elements: force, fraud, or coercion. Obviously, minors cannot consent to any sexual activity. So that would be a very different defense entirely. The defense would have to be that the activity, it didn't happen at all, and the individuals are lying. So I think that's going to be the potential game changer if we do get the minors wrapped up into a superseding indictment. And we know, at least if you believe the civil attorneys, there are 25 minor victims, one of which is as young as 9.
And those suits haven't been filed yet, but that's what Tony Busby, this Texas attorney, has indicated that we should expect to see in these lawsuits. Elizabeth, I want to go to you.
At what point does a salad become a salad? Is it when you add fried chicken, wontons, citrus vinaigrette? Or is it when you top it all with an egg roll? Clearly the egg roll. The Zaxby's Sensation Salad. Zaxby's.
His lawyer did file bail paperwork. Yes. This is the second question. This is from Simply Sour. Oh, Simply Sour had 2 bail questions. Second one is, was this his last chance for bail? Meaning the paperwork that he just filed.
Yeah, so they filed paperwork basically appealing the decision of the 2 prior judges denying him bail to the Second Circuit. And, technically, if they're denied, they do have another higher court, the U.S. Supreme Court, to go to, but I think that's very unlikely. I think this would be the final stop, them appealing to the Second Circuit.
What do you think of his arguments? And let me just lay out what some of these arguments are. So first, they say, we have presented a very attractive bail package. We have put $50 million secured by 2 properties, 24/7 security monitoring from an outside security firm, no access to phone, no access to internet, visitor logs, whatever other conditions you want to put. And they also said in their paperwork, Sean Combs knew he was under investigation since January. His attorneys immediately reached out to the Southern District of New York, even before there were raids, before there was charges, was trying to be as cooperative as possible. He surrendered his passport to his attorneys. His family members surrendered their passports. He tried to sell his plane. He came to New York to surrender himself for the charges. And he says that all these allegations that he was reaching out to victims and witnesses, either A, it can't be corroborated, prosecution hasn't presented enough evidence, or B, it was innocuous conversations. It wasn't something sinister, as the prosecution alleges. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument to make. I understand why they stated that. The former judge that was presiding over this case had said when he denied him the application for bail was there's no guarantee that he won't try to obstruct justice in some way, whether that's, removing or tampering with physical evidence, intimidating witnesses possibly. And there could be a strong likelihood of that. What was in the indictment and what a lot of the complaints are based on is a pattern of controlling behavior that he displayed. So you don't know if that behavior could spill over to trying to prevent witnesses from coming forward, speaking. And I also think this is a case that's going to rely heavily on physical evidence. The video of Cassandra Ventura being one. It's alleged that he filmed a lot of these activities that are at issue now. So there's always that risk. And if I was the prosecutor, I would be worried about that.
Nima, that's really, really great points. Nima, I want to go back to you. We have a question from Tiffany T on YouTube. And by the way, if you have any questions, we're going to be taking questions probably for the next 10, 15 minutes. So submit them now. The question is, if high-profile people have settled their cases financially and obviously quietly, does that mean they also cooperated in some way with the prosecution? It's a great question because as we were talking about, Tony Busby, this Texas attorney, indicated that he was going to name names, and I believe he told TMZ that some high-profile people have already reached out and tried to settle these claims. So this idea that if they settled their claims already, do you think that they're cooperating with the government?
Well, they're 2 separate cases, right? And Tiffany has a great question. There's the civil claims and the criminal. Now, theoretically speaking, someone who is under subpoena in the criminal case, they have to testify even if they've settled their civil claim. I mean, that being said, we know that Diddy has a lot of money, reportedly up to $1 billion, but certainly well over $100 million. And he has a lot of money to pay off these civil claimants. So if I'm the prosecution in this case, I worry that some of these victims may go sideways. They may be less than cooperative if they've been paid off in one of these civil lawsuits.
So it's a good question. And let me just throw this out back to you, Nima. You heard also this idea of the defense alleging that the government has engaged in misconduct. They said it was the DHS agents who leaked the 2016 video of Sean Combs purportedly beating Cassandra Ventura. This is a way to taint the jury, that they have been speaking to the media about what they found in the raids, what justice would look like. Those were interesting arguments that were echoed today. What do you take away from it?
Well, defense attorneys say all sorts of things. And as a former prosecutor, I don't do any criminal defense work right now. I don't think that's entirely accurate for a couple of reasons. First of all, that is clear video of Combs beating Cassie Ventura at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles, where I live. He paid $50,000 to get a copy of that video. And I know, because I do a lot of CNN, who actually was the first to get the video, that video likely came from folks at the hotel who retained a copy. So to the extent that the defense is making this argument, it may be good for the court of public opinion. I understand why they want a gag order to preserve whatever reputation Combs has left, but they shouldn't be upset at the evidence, because witnesses can lie, Diddy can lie, even victims can lie, but that video doesn't lie, and we've all seen it. So let's not forget, Combs denied all the allegations from the time Cassie filed this lawsuit in November of 2023, even after the raids in March, until May, when that video became public. He came out and he gave that, I don't think a very sincere apology, but an apology nonetheless. And I think that's how powerful the video is. I don't think the defense is making a very genuine argument here.
And his mom released a statement this past week, seemingly acknowledging that he wasn't truthful about the allegations, that, he probably wasn't honest, because he ended up apologizing for what he did in that video. So the idea that he denied everything, he didn't do anything, him apologizing in the video is questionable. Okay. I have a question for you, Elizabeth, that was made for you. Do you remember when we did the episode of Sidebar about NDAs?
Yes.
Okay. I encourage everybody to check it out. Okay. Now, the question is from Brie Alexis on YouTube. We have all been aware that Combs had multiple NDAs. So an account to witnesses, if someone still has an active NDA, does that prohibit them from being a witness for either side in this case?
So it's a great question. So you can't technically use an NDA to prevent people from reporting criminal or illegal activity. So if the person who signed that NDA, if they witnessed something happening, something criminal, one of the things that's being alleged in the indictment, that NDA wouldn't likely hold up. There still might be that fear on behalf of that person about coming forward, but if it were challenged in a court, it wouldn't really hold up.
Nima, here's another question. This is from Bubbly Unusual. How much of this evidence do you think will be public?
Oh, it's all going to be public. Just to add one thing to what Elizabeth said, and Congress passed a law a couple of years ago invalidating NDAs in sexual assault, sexual harassment cases. So they don't hold water. Those folks are going to have to testify. But what was the question again, Jesse?
I'm sorry, you were too busy providing another great answer. The question was, how much of this evidence do you think will be made public?
It will all be public, because we're going to have a very public trial. Unfortunately, there are no cameras allowed in federal courtrooms, and not in New York either. So, law and crime won't be able to broadcast it, but I'm sure they're going to have great coverage. And at the end of the day, I fully expect this case to go to trial. I don't think there's any possible plea bargain that will be offered. Certainly not anything that Combs will accept. So it's all going to come out. The victims are going to have to testify. We'll see if other celebrities or friends of Combs are wrapped into this as well, either as witnesses or co-defendants in a superseding indictment. So there's been a lot of smoke out there, a lot of rumors and innuendo, but it's all going to come to a head, whether it's in March of 2025 or sometime later next year.
I 100% agree with you. I do not see a deal likely for multiple reasons. I don't think, even if he was offered a deal, it would have to include significant prison time, and he's not going to agree to that. Elizabeth, I have a question for you. This is from Kathy Wu on YouTube. How do you think Diddy will be treated in jail? Are there any special cells or more isolated treatment for celebrities?
I highly doubt it. So he's currently detained in a facility in Brooklyn. It doesn't have a great reputation of how it treats its inmates and just the general atmosphere, obviously. But I think he's actually more prone to potential risk because he's such a high profile individual. I think sometimes we've seen instances where other inmates, we saw that happen in R. Kelly, actually, when they specifically target someone they view as high profile or perhaps wealthy. So I can't imagine there are great conditions that he's in right now.
Back over to you, Nima. I'm going to be doing a lightning round with some of these final questions that we're getting on YouTube. To Janae Taylor, is his mother being investigated as well as his sons?
Well, we know that there are some allegations against his sons. Little Rod in his civil complaint made them. Now, as far as whether family members are under investigation, it's really impossible to know. I mean, U.S. Attorney Damian Williams did talk about the investigation being ongoing. You heard Law and Crimes Elizabeth talk about a potential superseding indictment today. But until they go to a grand jury and that indictment is unsealed, we won't know who in Diddy's inner circle. It could be someone like Christina Horam, his right-hand woman or chief of staff. Again, it's all speculation as to who was involved and whether they might get wrapped up in this case.
That's a great point. I'm going to ask you the last question, Elizabeth, of our live stream here. And this is from Rob from Canada. So we decided to go international for this last question. How do they find any impartial jury members?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's going to be difficult. One is that in this age of social media and people following on all sorts of different social media platforms, they see a lot. When that video came out of Cassie Ventura, that was really difficult hurdle for his team to get over. So I think it's going to be difficult. I would imagine that if I was the prosecution, I would kind of veer towards a little bit of an older generation, maybe people that didn't necessarily follow him or his music, are not really in tune with social media, perhaps. That's the route I would take, but I think it is going to be difficult.
And look, people are going to know about him. They're going to know about this case. There's probably those who've even seen that video. The question is, can you put any of those opinions to the side and base this case purely on the facts and the law? Sometimes it's easier said than done, but we are not at that point yet. It is not May 2025. Again, I still don't know if that trial is going to happen by then. But here's what I do know. I've had great guests this past, Elizabeth this past hour, Nima this past half hour. So Nima Rahmani, I want to thank you. Elizabeth Vulai, I want to thank you so much. Really appreciate you both coming on. And everyone out there, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for the great questions. We will continue to follow the Sean Combs case for you on all of our different shows here on Law and Crime. And if there should be another court hearing, we'll plan to do something like this as well. Everybody have a great night. We'll see you next time. I'm Jesse Weber.
At Grainger, we're for the ones who pay attention to every little detail. The ones who fuss, tinker, and sweat the small stuff. Because the tiniest thing can make the biggest difference when it comes to keeping business moving. We get it. We're the same way. Offering access to product experts to help you quickly and easily find what you need. So whatever your industry, you're always getting professional-grade products. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.